As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Reluctant Preppers provides educational awareness and commentary only. Opinions expressed do not constitute personalized financial advice. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and seek qualified personal financial consultation before making investment decisions. Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. It's with great anticipation that we've been waiting to get this gentleman back on. He's hard to get on his schedule these days because he's generally busy meeting with members of Parliament rather than coming on our show. But he's here with us today just before going on a national media broadcast. John Adams, also known as Uppercut Adams because of his willingness to fight for the good of the people, is the chief economist at Good as Gold Australia. He's also one of the commentators on In the Interest of the People. John is here to talk with us today about a cashless law that's burgeoning against the people of Australia. John, thanks for joining us here again on Reluctant Preppers.
How are you going, mate?
We're glad to have you back and doing just fine, thank you. You've been involved in a whirlwind of controversy and writing and publishing and reaching out with petitions and entreating and writing open letters to members of Parliament and meeting with them. And it's all about this incredible story about a cash ban on large-scale transactions in Australia. We in the U.S. have certainly dealt with such things as cash reporting on large transactions since the 9/11 crisis, and people have had lots of opinions about the infringement of that on people's natural rights and their liberty to use the fruits of their labor as they see fit. But this is a new step in a very serious direction that you've been reporting on. What makes that different?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on the show again. Yeah, so a couple of points. So just like what you just mentioned there, so in the wake of 9/11, Americans had the Patriot Act, we had a suite of anti-terrorism laws, and so we have had a regime of any anti-money laundering and terrorism laws where transactions above $10,000 have to be reported to the government. So there's a specific government agency looking at any money laundering and terrorism financing activities. So those reporting laws that you have in America, we have in Australia. But what we're seeing now is, in my view, a new assault on freedom and liberty in Australia. The government announced last year, as part of its federal budget, that it was going to introduce a law making it illegal to conduct cash transactions above $10,000, in Australia. Now, that was announced, and typical of the mainstream media in Australia, that didn't get a lot of coverage. And then basically what we have seen in the last month or so, that so basically nearly 18 months on, or about 16 months on, the government finally released a draft version of the law, and this was released by the Federal Treasury. And so, myself and Martin North on our YouTube channel, In the Interest of the People, we were the first ones to really grab onto the proposed law. We did a show about it, and it's got 86,000 views. And basically, we've rung the alarm bell that this is the greatest assault on freedom in Australia for the last 2 or 3 decades. And it goes down to, the fundamental premise as to, what can you do with your own money? And what is the role of government in trying to police people's activities? Now, the government back in 2016 established what they called a Black Economy Task Force. They said that there was an endemic problem with illicit activities, money laundering, tax evasion, etc. And they put a task force together to look at a whole host of issues that related to this problem that the government perceived. That task force, which was headed up by a former head of one of the big 4 accounting firms, KPMG, came out and suggested this $10,000 cash transaction ban. And so the government is now implementing that ban via this legislation consistent with those recommendations. Now, in 2016, I wrote an article for the Daily Telegraph in Sydney, basically saying that this has nothing to do with the black economy, and it has everything to do with negative nominal interest rates. There are a raft of publications going back to 2016 through particular international organizations, including the IMF. And the IMF have written three key pieces in the last 12 months where they have talked about the need for central banks to push below the zero bound. So obviously, in a number of countries around the world, interest rates are already negative. Germany has negative yielding debt, Japan as well, some of the Scandinavian countries as well. So the IMF has said that when you go into a recession, you need anywhere between 3 to 6% to cut in interest rates to stabilize the economy. Australia at the moment is 1%. Most of the countries around the world are less than that 3 to 6% threshold. The United States at 2.25% already before the recession already hits. And so the question is, if we go into the crisis that I see, that your channel is dedicated to, and a number of the guests that have warned about this, whether it's Greg Manarino or Rob Kirby or a few of the other guests that you've had, the IMF said you need 3 to 6% to cut. Well, obviously for most central banks around the world that's impossible because we are we're either close to the zero bound or in some cases we're already negative. So the question is, well, how are they going to try to stabilize the economy? This is where the IMF has a global agenda around what they call deep negative interest rates. So it's not -0.5% or -0.75% like Switzerland. We're talking -3%, -4%, -5%. Never been done before in the history of humanity. So I would call it the greatest monetary experiment known to man. In terms of because just to take a step back, when I've argued in Australia that Australia's headed for economic Armageddon, the premise of that statement is Australia has the largest debt bubble in our history since the British came in 1788. At the same time, we've got the biggest debt bubble in the history of the world. So, even Gerald Salente in the last week or so gave an interview and basically said that if this global debt bubble was to blow up, we would have the biggest depression in world history. And why would it be the biggest depression in world history? Is because it's the biggest debt bubble known to mankind. And so the central banks are obviously extremely desperate with the commercial banks and the global elite to protect or to defend this debt bubble, because if it blows up, a whole host of big corporates, institutions, vested interests who have control of the power structure today, they will basically go bust. They will lose their power, and you'd have a complete reordering of the power structure within countries, but also the international power structure, because of there'd be a massive redistribution of wealth with the destruction of these bonds and debt. And so obviously the IMF and others have openly said that, for example, when you hold physical cash, the interest rate, the nominal interest rate you pay on physical cash is zero. So if you hold like a $50 note, you pay no interest on that note, you receive no interest on that note, and therefore if interest rates are negative, there's an incentive to hold cash, because zero is higher than a negative interest rate, and therefore cash undermines the regime of negative interest rates. And this is where even a former IMF chief economist Ken Rogoff and others have advocated for the abolition of cash. So this is what the war on cash is really about. It's not about illicit activities or terrorism or any money laundering. It's about negative interest rates. And now, without, I guess, my reporting with Martin North on our channel, not many people would be aware of these international technical working papers by the IMF about what the real agenda is. But we've tried to expose it. We've quoted several sources, and obviously we're in the fight of our lives trying to stop Parliament from implementing this legislation. And the legislation could come as early as the 9th of September. Now we've just gone through a Treasury consultation process, the Federal Treasury. So, I put in a submission, and we've had hundreds of people around the country, and we'll see what the final number is. Could be in the thousands, where a lot of people have put in submissions. We've mobilized a lot of people to put in, contact the local federal parliamentarian, their relevant senators, to tell them that this is a big deal. We don't want this cash ban, and that there will be significant political repercussions if the parliament and the government were to pursue this. And so what I've also done is, having been a former advisor in the federal parliament to a senator, I've met with members of the government. I've met the Labor opposition. I've met some of the other minor parties in the Senate to put my view forward. And so we've already had a commitment from one of the minor Senate parties that they will oppose the legislation if it comes to the Australian Senate. And so the fight continues, but that's where we're basically up to at this point in time.
You reminded me when you mentioned the U.S. Patriot Act, so aptly named. We had Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute on our channel, and he said that the Patriot Act is the cancer in the U.S. body politic. And one of the things about that is how it can be used, that or any quote-unquote good crisis you don't let go to waste can be used to justify and rationalize just about any usurpation of legitimate power from the people to the authorities. And once it's taken, it's never given back, even after the so-called crisis has passed. What you're talking about, let me just summarize it, make sure I'm getting it, is in the name of anti-money laundering, the Australian Parliament is on the verge of passing a law saying that it's not just that you have to report large cash transactions, but they will simply be illegal. You can't do large cash transactions anymore. And anybody who has been told not to use the slippery slope fallacy in argumentation may have got a little jaded over the years of seeing that actually happen in real life, is that once something's on the books, then all they have to do is start lowering the dollar value, and pretty soon you can't use cash. And when you can't use cash or use significant amounts of it, you are completely victim of the negative interest rate policies that can just steal the worth that you have stored up from your hard labor and you've put into savings, can be just siphoned away from you as a stealth tax. Am I missing anything there?
No. Yes. So I mean, you basically have summarised it quite well. So yes. So the ban is $10,000. The penalty, the maximum penalty under the proposed law is 2 years jail, or a fine of $25,200. Now, the way the government has structured this is, it's relatively clever from their part. So we have an act of parliament that says all transactions above 10,000 is illegal. Now, cash is defined as two forms: digital currency, which is basically cryptocurrency, and physical currency. Now, and what they call that is legal tender. Now, legal tender means a government-issued currency, Australian dollar, foreign currency. Now, there's a ambiguity in my head around gold and silver. There are certain gold and silver products in Australia, for example, Perth Mint 1 ounce silver and gold coins, which are legal tender. Other forms of gold and silver, like a kilo bar of silver or a kilo bar of gold, preliminary legal advice I've received is that's not legal tender. But basically what I've said to the government via my submission is, on the question of whether you can actually take physical gold and silver and actually conduct commercial deals using gold and silver as the basis of the deal. If the government's going to pursue this, that has to be cleared up, because the legislation doesn't talk about that. But so the act of parliament that is proposed says it's all banned, but then there's a regulation, and the regulation has this number of exemptions, and in those exemptions include, for example, individual to individual transactions. So, for example, Dunnigan, if you were in Australia and you had a car or you had a piece of furniture and you told me it was $11,000, under the proposed regulation, we could still do a deal, because the law basically says that if it's an enterprise, that's covered, but you as an individual and I as an individual, we could still do a cash transaction above $10,000. But also cryptocurrencies. So the Act says digital currencies are banned, but then the regulation says no, it is exempt. Now, the reason why this is significant is that with these exemptions, it doesn't actually require a new Act of Parliament to turn these exemptions off. It just requires a new regulation by the minister. And so basically they've set up this nice architecture where a politician basically has the power to turn off certain exemptions during a crisis. So, a couple of points. I mean, I met a couple of politicians, both from the Liberals and Labor. Now, on the Liberal side, one of the politicians said to me, "I don't see what the big deal is." And obviously, having been a former member of the Liberal Party, which is like the Conservatives, I basically said that the whole basis of the Liberal Party is to promote individual freedom, is to reduce or control the state power, and this is an assault on freedom. So that was one point. When I spoke to Labor, effectively the socialists, they said, well, because one of the politicians who I met, his office is close to a cafe, and he said if you go to the cafe down the street, the cafe owner will tell you that they're handling less cash today than 2 years ago. And one of the things that I have said to both of these is, when you are considering your vote in Parliament on this legislation, it's wrong to consider the legislation in today's environment. You have to think about what happens if we have deep negative interest rates, because the demand for cash will skyrocket. And if you've started to put in this architecture in now, you're going to make it increasingly hard for people to be able to escape negative interest rates when negative interest rates come in. So this is my big concern. They're doing this now before they launch these negative interest rates, so they effectively trap people in the banking system. And then when they want to escape, they can't, because Parliament's already passed this law. And so that's one of the points I made to several members of Parliament, that today's economic climate is the wrong time to consider the virtues of this legislation. It's actually when negative interest rates come in, and our central bank has basically said that the governor testified in front of Parliament a week and a half ago, and basically said that he was ready to launch quote unconventional policy if the rest of the world launches unconventional policy. So, and that includes negative interest rates and quantitative easing. Now, so he basically said he's reluctant to do it, and he doesn't think that it's necessary. But if everyone else does it, he may be forced to do it because of potential exchange rate implications. Now, the reality is that every central bank around the world has said they're going to engage in unconventional policy, and they're already doing it now. But obviously, the Japanese said they're going to ramp it up, and so is the Europeans, and certain regional members, regional governors of the Reserve Bank of America, of the United States. They've also said that negative interest rates is not off the table in the American context. And even in the last 24 hours, Trump has called for a 1% cut to interest rates in America and a restarting of quantitative easing. When our governor says we will engage in unconventional policy if we're forced to, well, it's clear that he will be forced to actually do it. And so my big concern is that they're setting up citizens for a massive trap, and not a lot of citizens are aware. Now we've been able to sort of get some people aware of what's going on, but the other thing is that obviously Australia's never had negative interest rates, and they don't understand how valuable cash will be in that environment, so obviously that's sort of part of the angle that we're trying to push. And even with these exemptions, I suspect that the government or the minister will, once you have deep negative interest rates and you can find evidence that people are trying to avoid the banking system by doing individual cash transactions or using cryptocurrencies to escape the official system, they're going to turn off these exemptions and trap people in this, in the banking system, and that obviously will, curtail freedom, and it will actually, hurt people's ability to protect their wealth, and that's what I think the real agenda is, and yet, most of several members of Parliament are not highly educated on this, and so we've tried to bring several international papers to their attention and just say, we're not making this up. This is not, one of the politicians said this sounds like a conspiracy theory. I said, well, no, look, we said these are the papers, these are the authors, this is the IMF. We're not making this up. You go look at the source material we've quoted. It's all there. They've all said that the abolition of cash will make a regime of negative nominal interest rates more effective. And that's what we believe the real agenda is. Now, and the other point I will make is, and so we've quoted this because we did a part 2.
Can we just slow down there for a second? The officials of the IMF and others saying it will make the regime of negative interest rates more effective. Is that political speak for we will be able to control and take away the people's money at whatever rate we choose?
Yes. So for example, when negative interest rates were introduced in the last few years in Japan, a lot of Japanese citizens went and bought safes, put them in their houses, and started withdrawing their deposits out of the banks and were holding physical cash. So there can be no question that there is evidence that physical cash or digital currency that's outside of the official system, like Bitcoin or some of the other cryptos, that will undermine the effectiveness of interest rates or negative interest rates. And this is where some of the international economists, like at the IMF, have spoken about how cash and physical or digital cash can undermine the effectiveness of this regime. Because remember, what is negative interest rates? It's the central bank imposing a negative charge on the commercial banks, and the commercial banks have to make up the money by imposing some sort of cost on customers. And the purpose is to get the money, out of the banks and either being spent or so being spent for consumption, or actually driving investment. And the theory is that if you can force people to stop hoarding cash, and you spur them to either spend it or to invest it, you're going to have a short-term lift in GDP, short-term lift in economic growth, and that can help stabilize an economy that's heading towards a significant recession, which obviously we're going to have because we have this massive debt bubble. So that's the underlying theory. But there was a long technical paper that the IMF wrote last year, and on a whole host of technical questions, they said, we think this on this issue of deep negative interest rates, they said we think this policy is going to is going to work, it's going to have this effect, but we can't really be sure because there's no empirical evidence, because it's never been done before. So when you look at whether deep negative interest rates will actually promote financial stability, will it actually promote economic growth? What is the impact on inflation? Obviously, what will it mean around hoarding of cash or hoarding of assets, etc. There's a whole host of very fundamental questions that you have to ask as to is this policy of deep negative interest rates, is this effective policy? And the IMF has said, well, reading between the lines, have said lack of empirical evidence. All we can do is take the best guess we can. And so obviously, governments around the world are now getting ready for that regime. And so, there are several European countries where they already have cash transaction bans. France, Italy, for example, Spain, they have it at much lower rates than what Australia is having. So, some countries have it between, 1,000 euros, 2,500 euros, 3,000 euros, etc. So, Europe is far worse on that. Now, and on this point about the black economy, so there is a professor, Friedrich Schneider from the University of Linz, Austria. He wrote a paper 2 years ago saying that that these bans impinge on economic liberty. Cash is basically the ability for people to be economically independent of the state, and that in his view, and he's been writing about. So he's a professor of economics. And he's been writing about the black economy for a long time, and he said that there's a lack of empirical evidence that that cash transaction bans are actually effective in reducing the black economy. And one of the key countries he cites is Sweden. So Sweden has nearly eliminated cash from the Swedish economy, and yet the black economy still is quite vibrant. And one of my viewers, who's an Australian living in Sweden, emailed me in the last month and basically, said that in his view, same story, that cash has been effectively eliminated in Sweden. And yet the black economy is still vibrant. So that's one of the other points I made in my submission. And I've said to politicians, the Australian government has not presented sufficient evidence to show that this policy will meet the objectives that the government has stated that it will achieve. And so, we had a former prime minister in 2008, advocating the need for evidence-based policy. Well, I mean, if that's the sort of genre coming out of Canberra, well, there is a lack of evidence that this policy will actually work.
So there's a lack of evidence that will achieve the stated ends, but there's certainty that it will reduce people's individuals' ability to be the masters of their own funds, their own wealth that they've created through their work, through their earnings, through whatever means they've got. That it will make them subject to the regulations that can be changed at a moment's notice that could impose negative interest rates on them. So I guess if you could help us in two ways. One, for our Australian viewers who are watching this video, what should they do in the next week here after seeing this to make sure that the rights of the individuals are upheld?
Sure. So yes. So probably Australians can do a few things. One is, if they're not educated on the issue, go to our YouTube channel, In the Interest of the People, and watch we've done now 3 parts. So we did part 1 where we talked about the issue. We talked about some of the propaganda coming out of the mainstream media, and then now in part 3 we actually interviewed an Australian senator who's part of this party One Nation, where they've actually come out to say that they will oppose the bill. So a lot of content there. My own website, adamseconomics.com. I have my own submission there, so people are free to read what I submitted to the government as my evidence against this legislation. But the other obviously important thing is that people need to contact their federal parliamentarian, their local member of parliament. They need to contact their senators and basically apply maximum pressure on them to basically say, we will not have this. And I've said to individual people, but I've said it on camera, rather than just, because some people have sent emails to their politicians, and that's obviously quite effective because they are getting a lot of volume on this. But I would even go to the extent of calling your politician and say, point blank, if you vote for this, we will vote you out of power. I mean, that's how serious that this is. Because I mean, you made the very apt point earlier in this interview, which is, once this comes in, 2 points. One is, it's going to be very hard to reverse. So once you give up liberty, it's very hard to get that liberty back. But 2, so the ban is at 10,000. Now, we've had an article coming out this morning by our national broadcaster. They wrote an article online, and there are big business groups who said that 10,000 is too high, and that the cap needs to be lowered even before the law comes into place. So some are advocating for 5,000, some are advocating for 2,000. And so again, if we go into a regime of deep negative interest rates, if 10,000 is still undermining the policy from our Reserve Bank, I have no doubt that the government and elements of the banking cartel would seek to advocate to lower the cap. So either they'll may try to lower the cap now, below 10,000, or in the next 18 months, once we're getting underway with these negative interest rate policies, we could see a further call to restrict cash transactions. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a slippery slope. I think if we don't stop the government, right now, we could lose a fundamental freedom that it will be hard to reverse, purely because the major parties in this country are very tied in with the banking cartel domestically, but also with the international financial elite like the IMF.
It certainly is evident that these forces and these phenomena and these trends are not isolated to one particular jurisdiction. You mentioned earlier that the Australian Parliament members saying, or the Australian regulators saying, well, we don't want to do this unless we're forced into it because of other countries taking their global policy steps, and we'll have to, match things to keep our balance from getting out of whack. So people who are not Australian citizens don't rest easy in any way. John has already mentioned, you mentioned that several European nations have already gone farther than this in banning cash transaction, and in some countries with negative interest rate policies. So it's coming soon to a country near you unless you stand up and do something about it. This is one of those clear and present dangers to our liberty and our rights to our own the work of our own hands, and being able to protect the wealth that we've gained. People, if you have any questions, please continue to submit them to the video that we've got posted as a call for questions for John Adams. John, we understand that you are due for a national media interview in just a few minutes, so we're going to have to let you go, but we'll circle back with you next week and try to get on your calendar again to pose some viewers' questions because we've got a lot of them ready for you on this topic and others. But this is the tip of the spear, people, right now in terms of taking away our rights to our own funds. So please stand in the gap and oppose this with all that you have. John, thank you for being such a clarion call to wake up to people and to let people know that these things can be called different things, but what it's about is taking away people's right to their own money and how they want to choose to use it and their liberty. So really appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you very much.
It seems so hard to order. Who can I trust, and how do I even start?
Oh, you just go to sdbullion.com/rp, pick out whatever gold or silver you want, add it to your cart, you can check out, and it's on its way. And they're A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau.
Wow, it's that easy?
Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
After I order gold or silver, how can I trust I'm going to get it? And I don't want everybody to know that I'm ordering gold and silver.
Oh, it's okay. It's fully insured, it's trackable, and you have to sign for it, so nobody else is going to get it but you, and it comes discreetly packaged. If you order a small amount, like maybe gold, it'll probably come in a box that looks something like this. Okay. And if you order a large amount, maybe like silver, it'll come in a box that looks something like this.
Wow.
But it doesn't say gold or silver on there. It might say something industrial or something else like that, but nobody's going to know what you ordered.
Oh, that's great to know.
Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
If I own gold or silver, how will I ever be able to spend it?
Oh, sure. Well, consider good times or bad times. Like in good times, you can sell it back to the same place you bought it from. sdbullion.com/rp will buy it back at the best price guaranteed on the internet. You can take it to a local coin shop and get cash in your hand, completely anonymous. Some people you know may be willing to take gold or silver coins in exchange for goods or services. Now, in bad times, when things have really fallen apart, time after time in history, people have found that in hard times, gold and silver really does come through as something that people recognize as value even after everything else has failed. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
What if gold or silver drop in price after I order it?
Well, everything fluctuates with time, but nothing is held up longer and better than gold and silver throughout all the changes that have happened in history. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp.
What good does gold do me anyway? I can't use it for anything.
Well, I think I found a form you might appreciate.
Wow. That's beautiful. Wow, I can wear that just about anywhere.
And you can take it with you through airport security and across borders. It's small and compact and lightweight, and you can even hand it down through generations. Your first ounce of silver is at spot price, and you get free shipping on any order over $99 at sdbullion.com/rp. Hey, Reluctant Preppers. If you haven't heard, we've already started our monthly 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle thank you gift to one active Patreon subscriber each month, signed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser. And you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.